All right, guys, here is your 28-29 test review video. As always, I have the test pulled up. It's our last review video, guys. It's done. It's over. I'll shoot a video to help you with conclusions with your essay binder. But this is it. I'm so sad. No, I'm not. I'm relieved. Like, we're ready. I'm ready. You're ready. We're all going to do fantastic. Starting out with chapter 28, you have a question concerning how Johnson comes to win in 64, but how that completely transitions with Nixon's election in 72. We have a huge shift between voting Democrat to voting Republican. So make sure we understand like the Kennedy mystique, and then make sure we understand like Nixon's rise to power. So you're gonna have questions about those. You have a question on Johnson's war on poverty. It's called something and it has some goals and he really likes it. Make sure you know that. You have a question on, again, on the 64 election, which we just kind of went through. So you have two questions on that. You have a question on when I give you key terms and you have to get the adequate definition. So make sure you know the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. I have it in the PowerPoint. The National Endowment for the Humanities, I have it as the NEH. It's in the PowerPoint. Make sure you know that. And then Medicare and Medicaid. So you'll have to pick the one that's correctly defined. So know those. Questions on the Great Society. Make sure, again, like you have like, yeah, make sure you know what the Great Society is all about. You have a question on the President's Commission on the Status of Women. This actually was happening in Kennedy's presidency, but it comes out the same year as a woman who writes a book, and she's also on your test. So make sure you know the girl in 63 who writes a book and like all that implies. And then what did the president's commission on the with women, like how'd that come to be? You have a question about, oh goodness, the Vietnam War. Well, no, you don't. Yeah, you do. Make sure we know that spending in the 60s is reflecting in the 70s. And part of the spending includes what Johnson is doing. And he's not just engaging in war in Vietnam. He's also pushing social welfare programs, which remember, that's the new definition of liberalism. If I could compare him to any president, I would compare him with the New Deal programs in the 30s to solve the Depression during FDR's program, okay? So just make sure you're understanding that and its long-lasting implications, because we do have to get through 29. I want you to know who the Young Americans for Freedom are. It's kind of like a key term question, but just make sure, look at the PowerPoint, make sure you know who they are. Make sure you know what the Students for a Democratic Society are. Because remember, do we have multiple groups that form during social change? Yeah. And do they always see eye to eye? No, right? Everyone's got different motives and different methods. Make sure you know the difference between STS and YAF. LBJ's presidency. Ooh, you have a question of who was running a successful campaign in 1968 for the Democrats. A successful campaign in 68 for the Democrats. Well, you have a question about the Democratic National Convention. Make sure you know what went down. And I showed you footage. You have a question on Nixon's victory in 68. How did he win? We talked about that. How he wins was also like a key term. It was like such a big, like, I just gave you the answer. How did the other movements model their movement off of? Did that make sense? So there's going to be a big movement and then everybody else is going to use it like a springboard. I just gave you the answer. Title IX question, it's really like a key term question. So make sure you know Title IX. You have some Supreme Court cases you have to look at. Make sure you know Griswold v. Connecticut. Make sure you know the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. Make sure you know Title IX. And then the Swan versus Charlotte case. So those are four things. They all have wrong descriptions except for one. So Swan, Griswold, Title IX, Equal Credit Opportunity Act, which I definitely like talked about that like crazy, because I told you the story about me wanting my black truck and access to credit and stuff like that. And we talked about Title IX. You have a Kent State question. Make sure you know what happened and why. Brown v. Board of Education case. Well, is that a Warren Court question? Oh, it's Brown v. Board, but it talks about the Warren Court, like the focus of the Warren Court. What happened after the big landslide victory in 72? Like, what did it prove? When you look at the Electoral College maps between 64 and 72, you see a huge difference. Like, make sure we're understanding like how much we're shifting and we're switching, right? There's a lot of back and forth in the 60s and 70s, tons of it. You have a passage that you are going to read, and it's all about Johnson's presidency. So the more you know about him, the better. Again, Great Society, super important. Vietnam, super, super, super important. And then again, anything that Johnson's doing that you're going to see ramifications of in the 70s. Make sure you know that. Moving on to chapter 29, which I finished today. With fourth period, we kind of got a little sidetracked, so I'm going to do a little bit more lecturing Wednesday after the quiz, just to make sure we know section 4, but we should be done. You have a question about OPEC. Well, it's not about OPEC. It's actually like more of a question of our reliance on oil and how OPEC plays a part in that. And it just kind of reveals a lot of like fragile aspects of our economy. Make sure you know that. I want to know what was a part of the birthing of the environmentalist movement. OPEC has something to do with it, and there's also an author that has something to do with it. I want to know what deindustrialization is, how that came to be. I want to know how the American city is struggling because of what's going on in the 50s and 60s. What are we seeing happening to our cities? Talked about this in a previous chapter as well. Proposition 13, who did it help? Who did it harm? So like the pros and the cons. I want to know some of the things that were created after Watergate. Some things happened. So go to that slide. I have like a whole paragraph that's underlined. You have a test question about the results of Watergate. Look that up. The Sun Belt becomes a huge migration because this is a big thing that's happening in the 70s. People are moving to the Sun Belt because something's going down in the 70s. You have a question about the feminist movement. You have a question about the ERA. You have another question about women's rights in the ERA. So just make sure we know who's in favor, who's against, what their argument structure is, who wins out in the end when it comes to the ERA, and then the names associated with it. The Griswold case, you have a question on Griswold v. Connecticut. Make sure you know that. Roe v. Wade was based on decisions not necessarily concerning abortion, but on something else. Questions on the sexual revolution. So we have a series of things that led to the sexual revolution in a nuance of events. Make sure you know all those things that are changing the way in which why people are having premarital sex, essentially. And a lot of it has to do with policy, and some of it has to do with morality, because we are studying the fourth great awakening. So make sure I think in all the classes we talked about the difference between, are we engaging in moral or political debates? Like, how does the government play a role in some of the debates that we have in the country, considering like pretty moral things like abortion and well, the other things. I don't want to give it away, but everything else. You have a question on the fourth great awakening. Make sure you know the things that they're pushing, why. And then your last two questions are in a passage, and the passage is about environmentalism and some of the effects of what we go through. How did we get to a surge in environmentalism in the 70s? You should know that. And then what are some of the like changes because of it? And that's it. That's the test. It's 40 questions. You're going to do good. It's like your last legit summative. If you don't take it on time, you have until next week to get that done. So next Wednesday and Thursday are going to be like my last days that I'm opening up for makeups. I don't want to do that into May, and you don't want to do that as well. So make sure we take control of that, especially if you miss the quiz tomorrow, same thing, come in Thursday morning or next Wednesday and Thursday. If you have any questions for me, let me know. Tomorrow will be quizzing, and then Thursday will be testing, and then we are off to review. For review, your key terms are on Schoology in the updates. You have to click into the updates, and I have a file, and it says like review week 1, periods 1 through 3 key terms. There's only 30. You define them, you date them, put them in chronological order. We're going to be using them throughout the whole week. We're going to do a lot of document work with all of them and just practicing text strategies. So study like you do well. I'm not worried. You're going to do amazing.